Welcome back, word nerds. Mike here with the Social Life of Language, making complex theory simple but never simplified. If you think that sounds cool, hit that subscribe button now. Today we'll be going over an article from 2013 called Racial Capitalism by Nancy Leong. That is the process of deriving value from racial identity. So what does that mean? Very quickly, we can look at an article from The Onion, which is a pretty funny satirical news site. This article is called Black Guy Photoshopped In, and it's about Iowa State University supposedly photoshopping in a black guy to prove it's a diverse university. What makes this particularly funny is that this actually happened in 2000 at the University of Wisconsin. They really did Photoshop in a black dude. Oh boy. So what happened there? Let's find out. So there's a lot of theories of race, there's a lot of theories of capitalism, and there's a lot of theories of racial capitalism. But let's focus on how Leong is conceptualizing this idea. Racial capitalism is the process of deriving social and economic value from the racial identity of another person. So that's pretty broad, but she narrows this down. The article focuses on instances of racial capitalism in which white individuals and predominantly white institutions use non-white people to acquire social and economic value. So Leong says she's going to focus on very specific manifestations of racial capitalism, where racial identity becomes valuable to whiteness. So first, a comment on the terminology. Leong deploys two big categories, white and non-white. And in footnote number 8, she says they are intentionally employing these simplified categories to get the point across. But do you literally have to identify as a white person to derive racial value from someone else? Well, no. But in this article, Leong is focusing on this very specific set of examples. And to me, it's part of what makes this article so easy to understand. So one thing we might have already noticed is that we're talking about at least two levels, at the institutional level and at the individual level. So we kind of already introduced the institutional level with that photoshopped black guy incident. On page 2155, Leong says, "We have internalized the idea that racial diversity is a social good, and as a result, we assign value to the inclusion of non-white individuals in our social milieu, our educational institutions, and our workplaces." Okay, so first we got a very complex word in there. Value. Inside that word value is a relation, a social relation, or a comparison. Because a lot of times we assign value to something by comparing it to something else. Racial identity in the United States comes with a historically passed down value system. At certain times in history, it was in a very literal, blunt sense. For example, we can think of that court case Plessy v. Ferguson, which ultimately helped produce the separate but equal doctrine. In that case, Plessy referred to whiteness and white racial identity as the most valuable sort of property, the master key that unlocks the golden door of opportunity. So historically, one has been able to cash in on whiteness. I'm going to be using this cashing in metaphor a lot throughout this video. Let's start with some very blunt examples and work our way to more complex examples. But what we are pointing at is the ability to trade the value of something for the value of something else. In economic language, we might call this the ability to exchange values. So we know that white men would use their white social status to, for example, access the right to own property. So right there, that's a very blunt example of how one derives economic value from social status, or specifically the social value of a white racial identity. Whiteness might be used to access specific rights, which allows whites to buy property. And then that property was eventually used to make money later. So it took a few steps to get to that literal cashing in, that literal economic value. But you had to own the social status, the social value of whiteness to make that original investment in the first place. So let's think about why a university would be interested in photoshopping in a black dude into their marketing material. Well, as higher education stands right now, the idea of diversity has a really high social value. We see it all over the place. We want non-white looking people on TV, or in corporate boardrooms, or in law firms and in politics, and of course in the university classroom. So in certain contexts, diversity has been elevated into a social good in a double sense, as doing societal good or societal progress, but then also as a good, a thing that has value. So maybe we need to start thinking about who actually gets to cash in on that value. We could argue that exposure to a social group that is not your own is generally a good thing. But the author says we should also think about the motives behind these decisions. We should think about the effects they produce and also the potential unintended consequences. For example, let's say a corporation wants to diversify their staff because it looks really weird that everybody is white. Let's say they hire me as their resident Mexican American. But then every time race comes up in a conversation, it suddenly becomes, oh, let's go talk to Mike about this because he probably has some feelings. And then all of a sudden I'm in this really weird position because now I gotta teach my fellow employees who I work with and my employers who I work for. So that means I gotta be real friendly about this stuff. And then, so let's just say I start hearing one racializing comment after another, and I get tired of calling out every single one as inappropriate. So then I slowly start letting things slide. All of a sudden, me not calling this stuff out, all the white people in the office start thinking, oh, this joke about black people is totally okay. Because I mean, look at Mike. He's not white and he's not black. Therefore, he's probably not biased about this one way or the other. So then we gotta ask here, did hiring me really change anything in everyday practice? And why am I coming out in every single company picture? And why does it look like I'm involved in every single department? So the author calls this thin diversity, because it's much easier to just hire a non-white person than to actually try and implement real social reform, or to acknowledge that this particular workplace is super toxic. As the author notes, often racial capitalism displaces substantive anti-discrimination reform. In this particular case, I'm bringing a very specific racial value that the institution wants to cash in on. Suddenly, they get to claim that they have a diverse workplace, or that they're anti-racist, or that they're all about equality, which all feeds into their institutional reputation, aka their social status, aka their social value. Now, corporations and universities have a long established pattern of doing this kind of thin diversity work, because when an institution's social status or social value goes up, this might result in them being able to cash in a very real economic sense later. For example, this might result in more students enrolling in a particular university. Or maybe a corporation can tap into a new market. For example, if we think of a law firm, hey, let's hire some more black lawyers. That way, maybe down the line, we'll be able to represent more black-owned businesses. So for the most part, we have been looking at the institutional level of racial capitalism. Now let's think about the individual level. We can easily think of every time a white person claims to have a black friend.
You know what look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest?
We can think of those particular moments as a kind of cashing in, or tapping into the social value of their friendship with a non-white person. So right away, this reminds me of this show called Woke, which is about a black cartoonist. He eventually gets hired to go to this really bougie party to go draw people. And he's like, cool, this is some easy cash. It turns out he's basically hired to be this black artist in a room full of white people that are just fawning over him. And he doesn't even actually get to draw anybody.
I told you it was fabulous. Let's get you a drink.
Absolutely. You're a cartoonist. I love the Boondocks. They should have made Wakanda land.
You'll love this. I was just in Uganda.
So, what's your opinion on reparations?
Clovis,
I am the only black dude at this party.
Eventually, he develops this political art slogan called Black People for Rent. And the point being that a lot of times white people assign value to a non-white person's racial identity, which in turn helps create their own identity as not racist, or as a good white person, or as a person that can legitimately talk about race because they have a black friend. But this is an inherently unequal kind of value exchange. There's a difference between, let's say, a white university student saying, being around diverse people is good. I can learn about their culture, which someday will make me more valuable on the marketplace when I want to get a job.
Do you have a problem with black people?
No, I love black people. I prefer black people.
Do you have black friends?
Endless black friends. You want to see pictures on my phone of my black friends? I have so many. I'm just deciding which one because there's like so many.
So in a very real way, we attach social value into this idea of cultural competence. On the other hand, let's think of a non-white student scrolling through a university website and they're thinking, cool, there's a lot of black and brown people here. I won't be totally racially isolated when I arrive. But then they still end up being that one student of color in the classroom. The university already got that student's money. Plus, I don't think I've ever heard a person of color say, finally, I'll get a chance to learn about white culture so that I can get a better job later. So you see, this is a very different way that white individuals and white institutions get to cash in on diversity. So does this mean that white people and white culture doesn't have any value? Well, I don't really think that's the point of this article. Instead, the author is suggesting, let's look at the way white people and white institutions reserve the power to define how non-white people can be valuable. Oh, and one more final thought. You might be wondering, can't non-white people also cash in big? Well, yeah, they can. And Leong has another article that's exactly on this topic called Identity Entrepreneurs. Or even better, she's got this new book called Identity Capitalists. And honestly, both of those are badass reads. Well, that's all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. As usual, you can download my publications from academia.edu. Thank you for your support on Patreon. This is Mike with The Social Life of Language, and we're done.